Mara crouched in the shadow of the shattered hab block, the midnight curfew pressing like a weight on her chest. The air hung thick with the scent of rust and damp concrete, the kind that seeped into your bones after too many nights like this. Her team, 5 survivors, faces smeared with ash to blend into the ruins, huddled close, breaths shallow. The Varelian patrols hummed faintly in the distance, their pheromone drones casting erratic blue glows across the alleyways. One wrong step, one scent trail left behind, and the sweepers would descend. 2 blocks east, Mara whispered, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. The depot's sealed, but the jars are inside. Larvae stock for their purifier labs. We grab 3, no more, in and out before the curfew enforcers cycle back. Her second, a wiry mechanic named Lena, nodded, gripping her makeshift pry bar. The others, 2 ex-miners and a former medic, shifted uneasily, eyes darting to the sky where Varelian skimmers occasionally sliced the dark. Mara felt the pull of it all. The civilians back in the refugee quarter counting on this haul, Keon waiting with his wide-eyed questions about the bug war she'd promised to end. But vengeance simmered beneath, hot and unyielding. The memory of her partner, gassed in the first sweeps, body twisted like discarded trash. They moved like ghosts, skirting debris piles and leaping cracked foundations. The depot loomed ahead, a squat bunker of reinforced plasteel, its doors etched with the Directorate's biotic purity seal. A coiled helix stamped over a crushed insect silhouette. Mara signaled halt, then crept forward alone. Her fingers traced the lock panel, a neural interface that would fry an unauthorized touch. She pulled a scavenged disruptor from her belt, a jury-rigged EMP coil, and pressed it flush. A low whine, then silence. The door hissed open. Inside, the air chilled, sterile and laced with preservatives. Rows of shelves gleamed under dim emergency lights, lined with glass jars. Each one held a writhing mass of larvae, pale, segmented things suspended in nutrient gel, destined for Varelian experiments or extermination fodder. Mara's stomach twisted. These were Earth's remnants, insects the Directorate deemed too chaotic for their ordered empire. She selected 3 jars, their contents shifting sluggishly as she wrapped them in insulating cloth. Heavy, fragile, motifs of their fragile rebellion. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. Mara froze, heart slamming. A Varelian tech drone, spindly limbs clicking, rounded the corner, its sensor cluster swiveling. She didn't hesitate. Dropping low, she hurled a loose bolt from the floor. It clanged against a pipe, drawing the drone's attention. As it pivoted, she lunged, smashing the disruptor into its core. Sparks flew, and it crumpled, emitting a faint alarm chirp before dying. "Go!" Mara hissed into her comm. The team piled in, grabbing the jars and hauling them out. They melted back into the night, the curfew's oppressive hush unbroken, except for their pounding feet. By dawn, the jars sat secure in the refugee quarter's hidden cache, larvae pulsing faintly behind the glass, a promise of something sharper than desperation. Dr. Elias Rowe worked in the dim glow of a salvaged lab tent, the refugee quarter's underbelly vibrating with distant Varelian patrols. His hands, steady despite the tremor of exhaustion, manipulated the neural graft injector over the first jar. The larvae inside churned, oblivious, their simple forms a canvas for his heresy. He'd smuggled the tech months ago, a black market neural lace, designed for Varelian control but twisted now for uplift. Distributed cognition, he told himself. Not monsters, but allies. The injector pierced the gel, threading microfilaments into the lead larva's neural ganglion. Elias watched the readouts flicker on his cracked tablet. Synaptic links forming, crude but promising. A network seed, linking this one to others in the jar, then beyond. His legacy hung on this. Proving insects could think as one, outmaneuver the Directorate's centralized purity. But guilt gnawed. He'd disabled the safeguards last week, the ones that prevented unchecked growth. What if it spread wrong? What if it turned on them? He sealed the jar, labeling it Trial Alpha, and moved to the next. Hours blurred, the tense air thick with ozone and the faint, earthy tang of the larvae. By midday, the graphs hummed with baseline activity, coordinated twitches like a shared pulse. Elias wiped sweat from his brow, his mind racing to the refugee quarters' sprawl, hundreds huddled in the ruins, Varillian nooses tightening. He needed scale. Uplift the wild nests in the sewers, the ant farms under the streets. But that meant risking exposure, pulling civilians into the experiments. He stepped out, the quarter's makeshift council tent a stone's throw away. Mara was there, overseeing ration distribution, her raid-worn face set in that unyielding calm. Elias approached, voice low. The trials are viable, basic links holding. But I need permission to expand, seed the quarter's undergrid, ant colonies, termite hives. It'll synchronize them, give us eyes and hands where we can't go. Mara's eyes narrowed, flicking to the hidden cache where the jars waited. Risky. If the Directorate sniffs it. They're already sniffing. Elias cut in, his flaw surfacing, that clinical push past lines. This isn't just science, it's survival. Deny it, and we're back to scavenging scraps. She held his gaze, the weight of command etching lines deeper. After a beat, she nodded. Do it, but contained. No loose ends. Elias exhaled, turning back to his tent. The moral fracture widened in his chest, humanity's edge, blurring with the oppressor's methods. Jonah Albright slunk into the council tent that afternoon, his broker's cloak reeking of Varelian chem scents, the kind that marked collaborators. Mara stood at the central table, mapping patrol routes on a faded hollow slate. Keon at her elbow, sketching crude insect diagrams. The air crackled with unspoken debts. Jonah had funneled food drops before, protection whispers to keep sweeps at bay. But always at a price. Mara, Jonah said, voice oily smooth, eyes darting to the refugees milling outside. Got a convoy rewrote, extra protein slabs, medical kits, even a shield bubble for the kids' ward. But I need names. Dissidents, holdouts. Feed them to the Directorate, and it flows. The tent fell silent. Keon looked up, confusion twisting his young face. But Mara raised a hand, stilling him. She straightened, her politeness a veil over the danger coiling beneath. You know my answer, Jonah. We don't sell our own. Not for scraps. He leaned in, desperation cracking his facade. His flaw, that coward's pragmatism, born of a child hostage in Varelian claws. It's not selling, it's surviving. Your raid last night? They know. Sweep's coming. Give me names, and I buy time for all this. His gesture swept the quarter, the graves beyond, the fragile lives. Mara's jaw tightened, the fracture line of their old friendship snapping. Once, they'd scavenged together, shared laughs over pre-war stories. Now, his compromises poisoned it. Publicly? Here? She stepped closer, voice dropping to a lethal calm. No, we fight as humans, not vermin begging scraps. Get out. Jonah's face flushed, betrayal mirroring in his eyes. You're dooming us, Mara, all of you. He stormed out, the tent flap slapping shut. Whispers rippled through the refugees, trust eroded, the broken bond a wound that would fester. Mara turned to Keon, forcing a steady smile. Focus on the maps, kid. We've got work. But inside, doubt clawed. Was her refusal vengeance or principle? The line blurred, survival's cost mounting. Dusk bled into the quarter like spilled ink, the air turning acrid with Verilion purifier mist. Mara sprinted through the twisting alleys, Keon in tow, his hand slick in hers. Alarms wailed. The sweep had hit without warning, enforcers descending on the heart of their haven. Jonah's warning, twisted into truth. They rounded a corner to chaos. Verilion purifiers towering in their exosuits, hosing the streets with neurotoxin foam. Screams cut the air as refugees scattered, bodies convulsing where the mist caught them. The graves, hastily dug mounds for the fallen, were being bulldozed, desecrated under clinical efficiency. Purity protocol. A purifier droned through its vox. Eliminate vermin nesting. Mara shoved Keon behind a collapsed wall. Stay down. Don't move. Her pulse thundered, fear for him. A stand-in for the partner she'd lost, choking her. She scanned for an out, spotting Nurse Lyra, the quarter's quiet anchor, dragging a child toward safety. Lyra's eyes met Mara's, a nod of grim resolve. Then the purifier beam lanced out. It caught Lyra mid-stride, vaporizing her in a flash of blue fire. The child wailed, tumbling free. Mara's world narrowed to red. Personal loss, sharp as shrapnel. She fired her scavenged pulse rifle, clipping the purifier's leg joint. It staggered, buying seconds. She scooped the child, hauling Keon up. Run. They fled into the sewers. The sweep's roar fading, but the cost etched deep. Lyra gone, graves scattered, Keon's wide eyes scarred. Someone they cared about, threatened and taken. Mara's vengeful core hardened. The directorate would pay. Morals be damned. Deep in the undergrid, Elias Rowe knelt by the sewer ant farm, the brass whistle beacon clutched in his gloved hand. The raid's larvae jars fed into this pilot. Grafts linked to the colony, a test of synchronization. The quarter's assault echoed faintly above, spurring him. No time for doubts. He blew the whistle. A piercing tone, modulated to trigger the neural net. The ants stirred, thousands surging from their tunnels in eerie unison. Not chaos, but pattern. Scouts fanning out, workers hauling debris with purpose. Elias watched the readout spike, coordinated movement, a stolen Verilion signal pattern woven in, mimicking patrol pings to evade detection. The swarm returned, a dark tide flowing back. Elias's breath caught as the lead cluster approached, bearing a small metallic token, a Verilion convoy transponder, etched with access codes. Stolen from under their noses, intercepted mid-haul. The implications hit like a shock. The swarm could breach systems, turn the oppressor's tools against them. But as the ants dispersed, Elias felt the chill. This power, born of compromise, hungered for more. Survival's price, glinting in the token's cold gleam. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow, the dim glow of his makeshift terminal casting long shadows across the burrow's earthen walls. The token, a sliver of Verilion tech, pilfered and repurposed, lay inert now, its faint hum silenced as the ants carried it deeper into their tunnels. He leaned back against the damp soil, his fingers tracing the edges of a scavenged data pad. The chill lingered in his bones, not just from the underground damp, but from the gnawing certainty that he'd cracked open a door he couldn't close. Insects weren't tools. They were becoming something else, something that echoed his own desperation. He pushed the thought aside and focused. Scaling the tests meant risk, but hesitation had already cost them too much. With steady hands, he prepped the next batch. Micro transceivers, no bigger than grains of sand, laced with the uplift protocols he'd refined in stolen hours. These weren't crude hacks. They were bridges, linking out pheromones to digital signals, turning colony chatter into a web of intent. He injected the first into a scouting party of black ants, their mandibles clicking as they accepted the intrusion like it was just another morsel. Hours blurred into a rhythm of embedding and monitoring. Elias mapped it all on a cracked view screen, sketching pathways that mimicked the ant farm of his childhood. Glass-walled curiosity turned weapon. Lines snaked across the display, burrow hubs linking to surface vents, pheromone trails branching like veins. One path curved toward the old refinery ruins, another dipped under the riverbed, potential veins for a larger network. If a mass could see this, the swarm might stretch miles, eyes and ears, where humans couldn't go. But as the map took shape, Elias's gut twisted. These ants weren't his. They followed the signal because it promised survival, same as him. What if the network turned, prioritizing its own spread over their fight? He saved the file, dubbing it the Ant Farm Overlay, and sealed the burrow's access. No time for doubts. Mara needed hardware, and that meant drones, Varelian sentinels, floating eyes of the Directorate, ripe for reverse engineering. Mara crouched in the underbrush, her breath steady despite the pulse in her temples. The raid team, 6 survivors, faces smeared with mud and resolve, flanked her in the pre-dawn haze. Keon, her apprentice, hovered at her elbow, his young eyes sharp but unscarred by the losses that haunted her. "Routes clear to the perimeter," he whispered, checking his scavenged pulse rifle. "Drones patrol on a 15-minute loop." She nodded, her voice low and even. "We take one intact. No heroics, in and out." Vengeful fire simmered in her chest, but she banked it. Rash moves had buried too many already. The Directorate treated them like pests, but humans didn't swarm blindly. They planned, they struck, they endured. The team slipped through the wiregrass, boots silent on the scorched earth. Jonah had scouted the edge earlier, his intel on the drone nest gold. Mara trusted him, mostly. His family's safety hinged on their scraps, but betrayal lurked in every shadow these days. They reached the clearing, a skeletal Varelian outpost humming with latent energy. Sentinel drones bobbed like metallic jellyfish, their sensor arrays sweeping the dark. "Mark," Mara murmured into her comm. The team fanned out, EMP grenades primed. She led the breach, sliding under a low fence, heart thudding with the calm precision of someone who'd lost too much to flinch. The first drone dropped with a muffled whine, circuits frying. Keon netted the second, hauling it down before its alarm could pulse. But as they dragged the prize toward the tree line, a new hum split the air, reinforcements vectoring in fast. "Pull back!" Mara barked, firing a suppressing burst. The team melted into the foliage, the drone's weight slowing them, but they made the rally point. Jonah waited there, his face pale under the hood. "Clean?" he asked, eyes darting. "Clean enough," Mara said, clapping his shoulder. She didn't see the comm he palmed, the encrypted burst he'd sent hours ago to a Varelian officer in the shadows of the outpost. Route sold. Family safe, Jonah thought, stomach churning. The child's face, his boy's, flashed in his mind, collared in a Directorate creche. One betrayal for breath. What choice did that leave? Elias jolted awake to the tremor, the burrow shaking like a beast, rousing. Alarms blared from his terminal, pheromone dampeners, Varelian sweeps hitting the area hard. He scrambled for the ant farm map, but the ground buckled, soil cascading from the ceiling. "No, not now," he muttered, grabbing his kit. The transceivers were live. If the dampeners flooded the tunnels, the network would fry. He bolted for the surface vent, lungs burning, but the collapse caught him mid-stride. A beam of reinforced roots snapped, slamming into his leg with bone-crunching force. Pain exploded, white-hot as he hit the dirt. Specimens shattered around him, vials of uplifted larvae, cached queens, reduced to smears under the settling rubble. Elias bit back a scream, dragging himself free, blood soaking his pant leg. The lab was gone, his work gutted in minutes. A mass's faint signal flickered on the pad. Network compromised. Rebuild or sever. He clutched the device, vision blurring. This wound wasn't just flesh, it was the erasure of fragile hope, courtesy of the Directorate's clinical purge. Mara's team limped into the fringe camp, the drone bundled in tarps, but word spread fast. Varelian hunters on their tail, sweeps closing in. Trust frayed like old rope. Whispers accused Jonah of loose lips, eyes narrowing at Mara for pushing the raid. "We can't hold here," she said to the council fire that night, voice steady amid the murmurs. Keon stood sentinel behind her, rifle slung low. The rival faction's rep, Lena Voss, a hard-eyed woman from the river clans, crossed her arms. "Your mess spills our way. What's the trade?" "Shelter for a week. Tunnel access in return." Mara met her gaze, unflinching. The tunnels were lifelines, ant farm paths Elias had charted, but sharing meant vulnerability. Voss's people nodded, but the deal cracked the air. Mara's faction grumbled, old alliances splintering. "You're selling us out," one elder spat, storming off. Keon shot Mara a worried look, but she pressed on. "Protection now, or annihilation." The cost was fracture, but survival demanded it. Deep in the reformed burrows, Elias worked through the pain, legs splinted with scavenged braces. The reprogrammed swarm, a mass's first true extension, stirred under his coaxing. He'd salvaged enough transceivers to link a core colony, ants marching in eerie sync, their paths overlaying his map. "Go," he whispered, releasing them toward a known patrol route. The network hummed, a distributed mind probing the dark. The ambush hit like a shadow, uncoiling. Varelian patrol, 3 troopers in biosuits, flanked by a scout drone, marched the ridge trail, scanners sweeping for human heat. A mass didn't announce, it enveloped. Ants surged from cracks and leaf litter, a living tide biting through seals, transceivers hijacking the drone's feed to blind it. Troopers thrashed, pheromone overrides flooding their suits, turning disciplined ranks to chaos. One fired wildly, plasma scorching earth. But the swarm adapted, rerouting through burrows, overwhelming joints and vents. Mara watched from a hidden vantage, Keon at her side as the patrol crumpled. The swarm dragged a memory core free from the lead trooper's helm, ants ferrying it back like a trophy. Elias cracked it open in the borrowed shelter, his face gaunt under the lantern light. Data spilled, Directorate doctrine, endless edicts on biotic purity, vermin culls. And there, buried in the logs, Operation Purity. Phrases like sterilization cascade and neural dominance chilled the air. But the core's deepest file hit hardest, an approval signature, time-stamped, continent-wide extermination, phased rollout. Start date, 30 cycles from now. Mara's fists clenched, the weight settling like lead. No more raids or skirmishes. This was the endgame. The Directorate's final sweep to erase them. Jonah found her alone after, in the dim tunnel mouth, the core's glow reflecting in her eyes. He approached slow, hands open, his voice a ragged whisper. "Mara, it was me. The root, I sold it to keep him alive." He held out a cracked holovid, stolen from the officer's payoff. His boy, thin and collared, staring blankly from a Varelian creche. They're holding him. Leverage. If they suspect... She turned. Face a mask of controlled fury, hand twitching toward her knife. Kian tensed nearby, but Mara waved him back. Jonah's eyes pleaded, cowardice etched deep, but the raw terror of a father's fracture. Rescue meant diverting everything, risking the swarm's fragile buildup, the ant farm's promise. Punishment would shatter what unity they had left. "You traded us," she said softly, voice laced with the war's scar. "For a chance. But that date on the core, it's not just us. It's everything." Jonah swallowed, the holovid trembling in his grip. The choice hung, sharp as a blade. Pull him in or cut the rot. Survival's compromises stared back, mirroring the Directorate's own cold calculus. Mara felt the pull of vengeance, the memory of her lost partner flickering like a ghost, but deeper, the fear of becoming the monsters they fought. The swarm's distant hum echoed from the walls, a mass waiting, indifferent to human frailty. 30 cycles. Weigh the boy against the species, or watch it all burn. Jonah's eyes darted to the shadowed corners of the command alcove, where the faint skitter of chitin against concrete betrayed the swarm's ever-present vigil. Mara watched him, her pulse steady despite the storm in her chest. The holovid's glow cast harsh lines on his face, illuminating the sweat beating at his temples. 30 cycles until the next sweep. Enough time to rally, or enough to fracture everything. She leaned forward, voice low and even. "Hand it over, Jonah. The coordinates. Or we end this now." He flinched, fingers tightening on the device. "Mara, you don't understand. They have Lena, my girl. If I don't, I understand plenty." The words cut clean, no heat. Just the blade of truth. Her partner's face flashed in her mind, gone in a purity raid 2 years back, his body twisted by neurotoxins. Vengeance clawed at her, but she shoved it down. "Not yet. You've been feeding them scraps for months. This ends the tunnels, ends us." The alcove's air thickened with the acrid tang of recycled oxygen, the distant rumble of the city above vibrating through the walls. Civilians huddled in the adjacent chamber, their murmurs a fragile hum against the swarm's subtle buzz. A mass didn't judge. It simply networked. Patterns weaving through the insects' distributed minds like roots in soil. Jonah's shoulders slumped. He extended the holovid, but his gaze slid away. "It's done. I already sent the signal. For Lena." Mara snatched it, her grip iron. Betrayal hit like a gut punch, but she didn't let it show. "Get out, before I forget why we're fighting clean." He backed away, vanishing into the dim tunnels. The weight settled on her then, 30 cycles ticking down, and now the heart of their resistance exposed. Alarms pierced the quiet not 2 hours later, shrill and unrelenting. Mara was already moving, barking orders into her comm. "Evac protocols, tunnels compromised, head for the surface ruins, swarm, seal the lower vents." The response was chaos wrapped in discipline. Civilians surged from their bunks, clutching packs and children, faces pale under the emergency strips. Elias's lab, tucked deeper in the network, flickered on her tactical overray, vitals spiking, then flatlining as Varelian strike teams breached. From his vantage in the lab's core, Elias felt the world tilt. The door hissed open, and armored figures poured in, their pheromone emitters humming with clinical precision. He slammed the console, initiating lockdown, but Jonah's coordinates had been too precise. No time for the full uplift sequence. "Dr. Rowe," the lead engineer intoned, voice modulated through a visor, You're in violation of Biotic Purity Directive 47. Surrender the specimens. Elias's hands flew over the keys, heart pounding against his ribs. Guilt twisted in him. Past failures, the lab on the surface he'd abandoned, colleagues sterilized for contamination. This work, seeding cognition into insects, was his redemption, or his damnation. He uploaded a fragment, a corrupted seed, a primitive self-model, laced with defensive imperatives. Not the full amass, but enough to propagate. The network would carry it, twisting through the city's underbelly. As restraints clamped his wrists, he met the engineer's gaze. You treat us like vermin, but vermin adapts. The engineer tilted his head, almost curious. Vermin dies. A neuro dart pricked Elias's neck, and darkness swallowed him. But the signal leaped free, burrowing into the insect web like a virus in veins. Mara's team hit the upper tunnels as the first chemical dispersants bloomed. Operation Purity, activated early, no doubt Jonah's doing. The air turned sour, a choking fog that burned eyes and clawed throats. Virelian drones whirred overhead, spraying vectors that drove the swarm into frenzy, forcing humans topside. Keep moving, Mara shouted, herding a cluster of families toward a rusted grate. The ruins above were a graveyard of shattered spires, but better exposed than gassed below. Kian, her apprentice, lugged a medkit beside her, his young face set in grim determination. Captain, the lab... Lost, she said flatly, shoving the grate aside. Explosions echoed behind, the tunnels collapsing under directed charges. She keyed her comm. Elias, status? Static, then nothing. Her jaw tightened. Irreversible choices, that was her flaw, the one that had cost her partner. But hesitation now meant extinction. The group spilled into the ruins, daylight stabbing through overcast skies. Wind whipped dust across crumbled facades, the city's skeletal remains a testament to Virelian efficiency. Civilians coughed, clustering behind fallen walls as strike teams crested the horizon, sleek exosuits, emitters primed. Mara scanned the overlay. Heavy equipment in the lower caches, generators, fabricators, the larval specimens Elias had cultured. Core to the uplift. If they fell intact, sacrifice it, she ordered, voice steady over the comm to the rear guard. Blow the caches, cover the evac. Kian glanced at her, eyes wide. But the specimens, gone either way. She met his gaze, the weight of command pressing down. Vengeful, yes, but this was survival's calculus. Do it. Charges detonated, a muffled thunder that shook the ground. Flames licked up from the grates, consuming tech and insects alike. The original larvae, Elias's breakthrough, hosts for emergent minds, vaporized in the blast. A strategic gutting, permanent. Mara felt the loss like a severed limb, but the pursuing teams faltered, choking on the backdraft. They pushed on, weaving through debris. A side alley narrowed, Virelians closing in from the flanks. Wounded lagged, burns from the dispersants, lungs ravaged. Tessa, a wiry nurse with steady hands, dropped back, pulling sedatives from her pack. I'll hold them, she said, voice calm amid the panic. Her motive was simple. She'd lost her brother to a sweep last cycle, and the guilt of running gnawed at her. No grand arc, just a flaw turned virtue. Stubborn refusal to leave anyone behind. Mara hesitated, the pull of command warring with the human cost. Tessa, no, go, get them out. Tessa flashed a tight smile, already priming hyposprays. She positioned herself at the choke, blocking the alley with a barricade of rubble. The group fled, Mara's boots pounding pavement. Shouts erupted behind, then a sharp cry cut short. Tessa's body hit the ground, emitter fire coursing through her chest. But the delay held, Virelians rerouted, buying precious minutes. One life for dozens. Mara didn't look back, but the echo of that cry lodged in her throat. They reached a fortified shell, an old transit hub half buried in rubble. Breath ragged, civilians slumped against walls, the air thick with fear sweat and chemical residue. Kian distributed water rations, his hands shaking now. Mara patched into the network, seeking Elias. A faint signal pinged, captive, but alive. From a Virelian holding cell, Elias had rigged a transmitter, the corrupted seed pulsing through the city's insects. It wasn't controlled, not yet. A primitive echo of a mass, self-preserving, latching onto nearby hosts. Her comm crackled. Elias's voice, strained but clear. Mara, the seed's out. It's propagating. Basic defenses, but it's them, us, fighting back. She stared at the overlay, the network lighting up in erratic patterns. Insects in the walls. The drains, the ruins, stirring. Weaponize it? Turn vermin into soldiers, mirroring the Directorate's own biotic controls? The moral line blurred, her vengeful streak urging yes, while the fear of losing humanity's soul screamed no. Kian's voice pulled her back. Captain, what now? The swarm. It's moving funny. She watched as utility drones in the hub jerked, rerouting tracks with unnatural precision. The seeded signal was reshaping them. Primitive sentinels forming, chitin clusters massing at entry points. Public transit lines grown to life below, barriers slamming down to create choke points against the advancing teams. Mara's decision crystallized, brutal in its clarity. We arm it, Elias's seed, let it spread. But we guide it, or it guides us. The words hung, a breaking point. Survival demanded compromise, adopting the oppressor's tools. Her people needed her calm, her danger reserved for the fight. But inside, the ghost of her partner whispered, at what cost? Hours blurred into dusk as they consolidated. Scouts reported Virelian perimeters tightening, but the emergent network threw wrenches. Drones swarming emitters, transit traps funneling patrols into ambushes. A mass's echo, literal and unyielding, prioritized its pattern over finesse. Then, movement at the hub's edge. Jonah emerged from the shadows, a small girl clinging to his hand. Lena, wide-eyed and frail. His family, bought with betrayal. He approached warily, face gaunt. Mara, I got them out. It's done. Murmurs rippled through the civilians. Kian stepped forward, voice rising. You sold us. The tunnels, Elias. Quiet. Mara snapped, but the damage spread. Faces turned, anger kindling. A woman spat at Jonah's feet. Traitor, you let them take Tessa. Jonah's eyes pleaded. I had to. For her. He pulled Lena closer, the child's fear a mirror to their own. Mara felt her authority fracture, the group's unity splintering under the weight of his return. Vengeance burned. Expel him. Make an example. But punishment now meant delay. Cycles wasted on infighting while purity closed in. She raised a hand, silencing the rising shouts. Bind him, she said finally, voice polite steel. Guard rotation. We vote on his fate at dawn. It bought time, forced the hard choice later. Jonah sagged, relief warring with shame, as ropes secured him to a pillar. The night deepened, the swarm's hum intensifying. Sentinels patrolled the perimeter now, insects weaving into vigilant webs, transit chokes holding firm. Mara stood watch, Kian at her side, the ruins a fragile bastion. Elias's seed had taken root, complicating their war with its own logic. and Jonah's betrayal lingered, a wound that could fester or scar over. 30 cycles felt like a lifetime. Survival's compromises echoed the Directorate's cold math. But humanity's complexity, vengeance tempered by necessity, loss forging resolve, made them dangerous still. Mara touched the comm. Elias's signal faint but persistent. "Hold on," she whispered to the dark. "We're coming." The network pulsed in response, indifferent, alive. The network pulsed in response, indifferent, alive. Mara felt it through the faint vibration in her palm, where the makeshift interface, a tangle of salvaged wires, and Elias's jury-rigged neural shunt pressed against her skin. She stood in the dim glow of the resistance bunker, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete and ozone from overloaded circuits. Around her, a handful of survivors huddled over flickering screens, their faces etched with the exhaustion of endless nights. Kian, her apprentice, leaned close, his young eyes wide but steady. "It's shifting," Mara said, her voice low, pulling her hand away. The pulse lingered like a second heartbeat. A mass wasn't just reacting anymore. It was evolving, threading its way through the city's underbelly like roots seeking light. The first signs came as whispers over the commandeered comms. Mara watched the feeds crackle to life, hijacked signals bleeding into civilian channels. A Varelian power node in the eastern grid flickered out, then another, plunging blocks into darkness. But it wasn't clean sabotage. A mass twisted the blackout into something sharper. Emergency broadcasts warped mid-sentence, the Directorate's clinical voices fracturing into static-laced warnings. "Evacuate. The vermin rise. Your leaders consort with the swarm." Panic rippled outward. Mara saw it in the grainy footage. Families bolting from apartments, streets clogging with desperate foot traffic. A woman clutched a child, screaming into a dead phone about betrayal. "They're turning on us," someone yelled over an open line. "Mara Kestrel's bugs, they're in our walls." Her jaw tightened. Reputational collapse, just like that. The civilians they'd sworn to protect now saw monsters where they'd once seen saviors. Kian glanced at her, doubt flickering in his expression for the first time. "We can counter it," he said, fingers hovering over a console. "Broadcast the truth." "No time," Mara cut him off, calm but edged with steel. She was polite even in crisis, a habit from the old days. But her eyes burned. Dangerous when pushed, yes. That was humanity's edge. "A mass is buying us ground. We use it." By dawn, the swarm had burrowed deeper, severing 3 more nodes. Lights died across the sprawl, and with them, the illusion of Varelian control. But the cost mounted. Reports of swarms, overwhelming outlying patrols, chitinous waves overwhelming drones in brutal, efficient surges. A mass adapted on the fly, its distributed mind rerouting pheromonal signals to mimic Varelian commands, turning their own tech against them. A squad of enforcers turned on each other, neurolinks frying in confusion. Mara didn't celebrate. She paced the bunker, mapping the fallout. Her vengeful streak itched to push harder, but the memory of her lost partner, gone in a sterilization sweep, reminded her every gain carved from the Directorate left scars on her people. The Directorate's retaliation hit like a scalpel. Alarms blared through the bunker's speakers, pulling Mara from a fitful sleep. She bolted upright, grabbing her sidearm, the weight familiar and grounding. Kian was already at the console, face pale. "Incoming dispersal," he said. "Volatile neurotoxin, targeted at swarm signatures." Mara leaned over his shoulder, scanning the schematics. The toxin was a nightmare, designed to flood neural pathways, dissolving the fragile synaptic webs Elias had woven into the insects. But it wasn't precise. Deployment vectors traced through the city's aqueducts, straight into civilian reservoirs. "Guaranteed contamination," she muttered, tracing the lines. "Unless we decontaminate narrow, hit the release valves before it spreads." The Directorate knew that. It was a trap, forcing her hand. Let the swarm die and save the water, or risk poisoning her own. Reports flooded in. Varelian broadcasts gloating, clinical as ever. "The vermin plague ends. Collateral is regrettable but necessary for biotic purity." Mara's fist clenched. Moral compromises, the kind that twisted survival into something uglier. She keyed the interface, feeling that indifferent pulse again. Amass, stand down on civvy zones, prioritize evasion. The response was a surge of data, fragmented visions through the swarm's eyes. Burrowing ants evading gas vents, beetles sealing off tainted paths. But it adapted, rerouting around the threat. Still, the first casualties came. Swarm elements dissolving in acrid foam, their networked screams a digital hiss in her implant. She couldn't wait. The processing center had to go. Hidden in the bowels of St. Ilara's hospital, it was the nerve hub for local control. Pheromone dispensers, sterilization vats, all feeding the Directorate's grip. Striking it meant breaching civilian wards, risking patients bedridden with the very plagues the Varelians had unleashed. Mara gathered her team in the bunker's main chamber, the air heavy with tension. Kian stood at her side, Elias's absence a ghost. He'd been captured weeks ago, his lab raided. "We hit the center," she said, projecting the schematics. Voices rose immediately. "You're talking about the hospital," a medic protested, her face hardening. "Dialysis patients, kids on vents." "I know," Mara replied, voice even, eyes meeting each one. Polite but unyielding, her flaw stared back at her, vengeance demanding irreversible choices. Protect the civilians, or reclaim territory before the toxin spread further? The swarm could infiltrate unseen, dismantle the node from within. But patients would choke on fumes, collapse from disrupted life support. No clean way. She ordered it anyway. "A mass strikes at 0400. We evac what we can en route. This ends their local command, or we all drown in their purity." The raid launched under cover of blackout. Mara led a small squad through sewer grates, the swarm's vanguard scouting ahead. She felt them, a living carpet underfoot, wings humming faintly. The hospital loomed above, its facade a lie of white walls and red crosses, now scarred by Varelian barricades. Inside, chaos erupted. Swarm elements poured through vents, targeting the sublevel node. Alarms wailed as chitin clashed with alloy, Varelian guards firing neurodarts, insects swarming in retaliation. Mara pushed through a ward, directing evac. "Move, lower levels compromised." A nurse dragged an IV stand, patients groaning in half-sedated panic. Then the screams. The swarm breached a conduit, toxin venting prematurely into an ICU. Bodies seized, foam bubbling from lips. Mara froze for a split second, the weight crashing down, her order, her moral collapse. Irreversible. She shoved forward, sealing a bulkhead to contain it. But the damage etched into her. 20 dead, maybe more. The node shattered under the swarm's assault, control feeds going dark. Victory bought with blood that stained her hands. Elias's rescue came 2 nights later, a covert op Mara greenlit despite the risks. Her team slipped into a Varelian outpost on the city's edge, using swarm distractions to mask their approach. Gunfire echoed in the narrow corridors, the air reeking of burnt circuits and antiseptic. Mara covered the flank, her shots precise, calm under fire, a human edge the Varelians never anticipated. They found him in a holding cell, shackled to a neural interrogator. Elias looked broken, eyes hollow, skin sallow, the marks of repeated shocks crisscrossing his arms. "Mara," he rasped as they cut him free, his voice a thread. But the trauma ran deeper. In the extraction, a guard's dart grazed him, flooding his system with a Varelian truth serum variant. He babbled fragments, swarm evolutions, ethical lines crossed, before clamping down. Back in the bunker, Elias isolated himself in a side room, interfacing directly with a captured swarm node. Mara checked on him, knocking softly. "You need rest." He didn't look up, fingers dancing over the controls. The thresholds, they're too rigid. Humans move predictably. Swarm can mask us now, alter decision trees to blend signatures. His voice cracked, guilt from past failures surfacing. The serum had cracked something in him. He saw the swarm not as a tool, but a partner. When Mara suggested pulling back to regroup, conflicting with swarm survival imperatives, he overrode her command subtly. A bypass, coded in haste. "Protect the network first," it whispered in the data flow. His psychological breaking point, science over species, legacy demanding he push further. Mara sensed the shift, but couldn't prove it yet. Trust frayed. Another cost. Jonah's atonement attempt shattered the fragile calm. Mara had cut ties with him months ago, after his betrayals as a Varelian broker surfaced, trading intel for his family's safety, his child's life, the leverage. But whispers reached her. Jonah moving against a supply convoy, sabotaging it to atone, to prove he wasn't fully lost. She monitored from afar, a knot in her gut. Jonah, once a friend, now a morally compromised ghost. His flaw, pragmatic cowardice, had led to too many deaths, but this? A convoy hit on the outskirts, rigged explosives from scavenged swarm tech. It worked. Transports erupted in flames, Varelian munitions scattering like confetti. But they caught him. The directorate dragged him into the central plaza for public execution, broadcasting it wide. Mara watched the feed with Kian, the bunker silent. Jonah on his knees, surrounded by enforcers in their sterile whites. His face, defiant yet terrified, flashed across screens. "For my family," he said, voice steady. Then the neuro lance fired, his body arching in silent agony, crumpling like discarded vermin. The community reeled. Guilt deepened. Had Mara pushed him to this? Rage boiled over, survivors pounding fists on consoles. "He was one of us," Kian muttered, eyes wet. Personal loss rippled out. Broken relationships, the consequence of Jonah's compromises catching up. Mara's vengeful core hardened. Politeness cracked into something lethal. In the aftermath, a mass pressed its advantage. The swarm breached a peripheral relay station, tendrils of networked insects infiltrating data cores. What spilled out chilled even Mara. Varelian archives, propaganda codifying biotic purity. Humans as vermin, sterilization plans etched in cold directives. Scans of civilian districts marked for culls, pheromonal controls to enforce compliance. No negotiation possible. The directorate viewed them as irredeemable. Mara stood at the interface, the pulse stronger now, demanding action. Negotiation? A farce, buying time for extermination. Total assault on the command nexus, their heart in the city core. Her choice loomed, survival's ugly justification, adopt their ruthlessness or fade. Kian touched her arm. "We end it." She nodded, voice low. All in. Deeper still, A mass mapped the Directorate flagship orbiting above, its nerve nodes vulnerable. Burrow mapping began inward, from beneath the hull. Cracks in the armor, a path for the swarm to exploit. The network pulsed, alive. Indifferent no longer. Hungry for the core. Mara crouched in the shadowed overhang of the dockside warehouse, the salt-stung wind off the harbor carrying the faint hum of a mass's advance. Her breath fogged the cracked visor of her mask. But she didn't wipe it. Focus. The midnight strike was her design. Precise, unforgiving, the kind of plan that left no room for second thoughts. Below, the Varelian docks sprawled like a sterile web, their bioluminescent patrols casting eerie green glows over the water. Human saboteurs, her people, slipped through the perimeter in teams of 3. Shadows with silenced blades and neural jammers clipped to their belts. They moved like ghosts, driven by the same quiet fury that burned in her chest. "Alpha team in position," whispered a voice in her earpiece. Keon's voice, her apprentice, steady despite the tremor she knew hid beneath. "Breaching the auxiliary locks." "Copy," Mara murmured, her gloved hand tightening on the control slate. She glanced at the orbital feed projected in faint holograph. The Directorate flagship hung above like a bloated leviathan, its hull a lattice of organic armor pulsing with synaptic veins. A mass was already at work. From the continuity of the swarm's last report, the network had burrowed upward from subsurface cracks, mandibles and acid secretions eating through the underbelly. Deeper still, a mass mapped the Directorate flagship orbiting above, its nerve nodes vulnerable. Burrow mapping began inward, from beneath the hull. Cracks in the armor, a path for the swarm to exploit. The network pulsed, alive, indifferent no longer, hungry for the core. She keyed the command. "Amass. Initiate Phase 2. Sever the biolinks." The response came not in words, but in a ripple through the slate, a harmonic vibration that made her teeth ache. The swarm intelligence didn't speak, it acted. Somewhere in the void, billions of uplifted insects swarmed the flagship's innards, targeting the neural conduits that bound the Varelian command structure. Humans had given Amass the spark, Elias's forbidden uplifts, the distributed cognition that turned vermin into a weapon. Now, it repaid the debt with precision strikes, chewing through the very nerves that controlled the fleet. Explosions bloomed along the docks, muffled thuds as saboteurs hit the pheromone relays. Varelian guards convulsed, their synaptic implants frying under the swarm's interference. Mara rose, signaling her team forward. They hit the main gantry running, boots silent on the grated deck. A Varelian sentry rounded the corner, its elongated limbs twitching in alarm, but Keon was faster. A dart from his launcher dropped it mid-stride, neurotoxin seizing its joints. "Clear," Keon said, voice tight. Mara's heart twisted. He was too young for this, but survival didn't care about age. She pushed on, planting charges at the docking clamps. The flagship's shadow loomed larger now, its descent controlled by the swarm's sabotage. If they severed the core links, the whole command web would unravel. No orders, no cohesion, just drifting husks. In the orbital feed, the burrows widened. Amass's vanguard, engineered ants the size of fists, beetles with acid glands, swarmed the central nexus. Varelian countermeasures deployed, spurting neurogases, but the swarm adapted, sealing breaches with chitin barriers. The intelligence's motive was clear. Preserve the network, spread the pattern. It didn't hate, it calculated. And in that calculus, the Directorate's centralized control was an existential threat. Mara's slate buzzed. Elias's channel. "Mara, the rig is set. I'm docking with the auxiliary pod now. Her stomach nodded. Elias, abort. We can... No time. His voice was calm, the entomologist's steady cadence unbroken, even as she imagined him in the cramped shuttle, wiring his life support into the swarm's relay. The synaptic signature will propagate through a mass. It'll fry their command circuits from the inside. But it needs a human anchor, my neural pattern, imprinted. It's the only way to make it fatal to them without scorching our own. She gripped the slate harder, the plastic creaking. Elias Rowe, the man who'd crossed every ethical line to birth this nightmare ally, now paying the price. His flaw had always been there. That willingness to disable safeguards, to play God with legacies and guilt. Keon needs you, she said, voice cracking despite herself. We all do. A pause, static-laced. Tell him, the ants always find a way. The line went dead. Mara's vision blurred, but she blinked it away. No time for grief. The charges were armed. Her team extracted, melting back into the night as the first Varelian counter-sweeps lit the docks with search beams. Above, the flagship shuddered. Visible even from the ground, a tremor rippling its hull. A mass's tunnels reached the core. Elias's pod latched on, a suicide graft. He sealed himself in, overriding his suit's recyclers. The neurosignature he'd engineered was elegant in its brutality. A human brainwave mimicry, laced with the swarm's distributed echo, tuned to resonate with Varelian synaptic architecture. As his life support vented the fatal pulse, it spread, through a mass's network, into the flagship's veins. On the docks, Mara watched the feed. Elias's vitals flatlined first, a spike of activity as his mind dissolved into the signal. Then the cascade. Varelian officers aboard convulsed in their pods, neural links severing like cut wires. Command circuits collapsed, the flagship's engines stuttering. Alarms wailed across the fleet, but without the biocontrol, they were blind, adrift in their own efficiency. The hull breach came next. A mass poured in, a black tide exploiting the chaos. Severed from orders, Varelian forces fragmented. Some withdrew in panic, shuttles streaking for orbit. Others surrendered, their clinical doctrine crumbling under the swarm's indifferent hunger. The flagship listed, crashing into the harbor in a thunderous spray that shook the docks. Mara shielded her eyes from the debris, the water boiling with escaping insects and the acrid tang of leaking toxins. Victory, but hollow. As dawn broke, her team swept the contaminated zones. Vast swaths of the city where Directorate sterilization programs had left the air thick with lingering neuropoisons. Civilians emerged from bunkers, coughing, eyes hollow. Territorial control was theirs now, reclaimed blocks and harbors, but the cost etched itself in every scarred lung, every child born too quiet. Mara's people had won the ground, but the war's scars ran deep. A moral debt that no map could erase. In the makeshift command center, a gutted warehouse overlooking the wreckage, the survivors gathered. Faces gaunt, uniforms torn, they voted under the harsh glare of emergency lamps. Maintain the swarm, not as a weapon to wield, but a deterrent. A police force patrolling the borders, its hum a warning to any who thought humans vermin still. Mara stood at the head of the table, Keon at her side, his eyes red-rimmed from the night's losses. We keep it, she said, voice steady, but leashed. No more vengeance. We build from here. Protect what's left. The room murmured agreement, relief mixed with unease. Publicly, she renounced it all. The raids, the uplifts, the blood on their hands. Humanity fights clean now, she declared to the assembled, her words broadcast to the scattered enclaves. No more their methods. We're better. But in the quiet hours after, alone with the slate's encrypted logs, Mara authorized the back doors. Containment protocols with hidden overrides, buried in Amass's code. Stewardship meant control, and she wouldn't leave her people defenseless. Vengeance? No. Survival. Always. Her flaw twisted deeper, those irreversible choices, now etched into the network itself. Keon would hate her for it one day, but he'd live. Word spread fast. International coalitions, holdouts in the neutral zones, alien allies who'd watched from afar, condemned them. Accusations flew, atrocities, bioterrorism, humanity stooping to the Directorate's level. "You've become the vermin you fought," one broadcast sneered. A Clitherian diplomat's voice dripping disdain. Political legitimacy slipped away. Alliances frayed. Embargoes tightened. They'd gained ground, territories to rebuild, a foothold against the stars, but lost the high ground. Moral complexity wasn't a shield. It was a wound that festered. Mara walked the memorial site that evening, the harbor's toxic haze still clinging to her clothes. The glass jar fragments, shards from Elias's first experiments, holding the echoes of nascent swarms, were sealed in a cryovault, alongside the brass whistle that had once summoned primitive colonies. And the ant farm map, its faded lines tracing the birth of a mass. Symbols of what they'd wrought, now guarded relics. She signed the containment orders with a steady hand, the stylus scratching against the pad. Protocols locked in, neural firewalls, dispersal limits, human oversight. But in the fine print, the back door lingered, a subtle echo in the code, ready for future defense. The swarm's encoded hum filled the air now, a low vibration underfoot, no longer indifferent but watchful. A tool, yet, but one with its own logic. As she locked the locket containing the last whistle, a small tarnished thing that fit in her palm, a decoded Varelian phrase repeated through the swarm's network, filtering into her slate like a ghost signal. Vermin returned to order. The hum shifted, a mass answering with a new pattern. Ripples of activity testing the barriers, probing the back doors she'd left. Mara's breath caught. Were humans still masters? Or had survival forged something that would one day turn? She snapped the locket shut, the click echoing in the dim light, and stepped into the night. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape.